There's a plant growing wild along roadsides and riverbanks across Europe and North America right now that can wash your clothes, clean your dishes, and shampoo your hair. It produces a gentle lather. When you crush its roots and add water, it grows back every year without replanting. And for roughly 4,000 years, it was the only soap most of the world ever knew. That plant is called soapwort. Its Latin name is Saponaria officinalis. And the word saponin, the chemical compound found in every bar of natural soap and every bottle of shampoo on your bathroom shelf, literally gets its name from this one plant. Sapo is Latin for soap. Soapwort was so effective that it was trusted to clean the most famous piece of cloth on the planet, the Shroud of Turin. Researchers examining the linen fibers found evidence that the cloth had been washed with Saponaria officinalis because the saponins left a chemical signature in the fabric that's still detectable today. A 4,000-year-old cleaning method, gentle enough for a relic that millions consider sacred. That was the state of things for most of human history. By the 1950s, almost nobody in the Western world had heard of it. So how did a plant that literally gave soap its name get erased from an entire civilization's memory in less than 100 years? Soapwort's dominance over human hygiene wasn't some accident of history. It was chemistry. The root of Saponaria officinalis contains roughly 21% saponin by weight, one of the highest concentrations found in any plant on Earth. And saponins do something clever at the molecular level that makes them natural cleaning agents. Each saponin molecule has two ends. One end is hydrophilic, meaning it bonds with water. The other end is lipophilic, meaning it bonds with fats and oils. When you crush soapwort roots and mix them into water, the saponin molecules arrange themselves into tiny spheres called micelles. The water-loving ends face outward toward the water, and the fat-loving ends face inward, trapping grease and dirt inside the sphere. That's exactly how modern soap works. The same fundamental chemistry. The same mechanism that every detergent on the market uses today. The difference is that soapwort does it without a factory. And soapwort was far from the only plant doing this. On the other side of the world, in the foothills of the Himalayas, a tree called Sapindus mucorossi had been doing the same job for just as long. You might know its fruit by a more common name, soap nuts. They're not actually nuts at all. They're dried berries, technically drupes, related to lychees. The shells of those berries are packed with saponins, and when they get wet, they release a mild, effective lather. In India, soap nuts are called retha. In Indonesia, they're known as lerak. For centuries, Indian women used the shells to wash their hair and get rid of dandruff. They used them to launder silk, cotton, and wool fabrics without fading the dyes or damaging the fibers. Indian jewelers used the same shells to restore tarnished gold and silver ornaments to a bright shine, and Ayurvedic medicine incorporated soap nuts into treatments for skin conditions like eczema, acne, and psoriasis. Here's the detail that makes this even stranger. The Sapindus mucorossi tree begins bearing fruit after about 10 years of growth, and then it keeps producing for roughly 90 years straight. One tree, 90 years of soap. Growing in poor soil, along roadsides, even in cities, the tree can reach up to 25 meters tall. The harvesting window runs from November to January each year, and the dried nuts can be reused 3 to 5 times per wash load before they're spent. After that, you compost the shells. Zero waste. The fruit contains roughly 10 to 15% saponin by weight, depending on how ripe it is when harvested. And it wasn't just South Asia. Native peoples in North America had their own saponin-rich plants. The amole, or wavy-leaf soap plant, grew wild across California and Oregon. The bulb was stripped of its outer husk, crushed into a pulp, and used as a lather for washing hair and skin. It left hair soft and silky. The fibrous husk was even repurposed as a brush. Yucca roots served the same purpose across the desert Southwest. Buffaloberry fruits, horse chestnuts, and several other native species all contained enough saponin to produce a working lather. Virtually every major civilization on Earth, on every inhabited continent, independently discovered that certain plants could clean things. The chemistry was always there, waiting in the soil. But the cleaning story was never the full picture. Because while most of the world used these plants to wash things, one region figured out that the same chemistry could make food better. In Turkey, soapwort root is called kavan, and it has been used in Turkish cuisine for centuries, possibly going all the way back to ancient times. The Turkish Food Codex still lists soapwort extract as an approved additive today, specifically in the production of tahini halva, Turkish delight, and nougat. The reason is that same saponin chemistry working in a completely different way. When you whip soapwort extract into a sugar syrup, the saponins create an incredibly stable, fine-textured foam. In tahini halva, that foam does three things at once. It bleaches the color of the sugar wax, turning it lighter. It works as an emulsifier, preventing the sesame oil from separating out of the mixture. And it gives halva its characteristic layered, fibrous texture that pulls apart in your hands. Researchers at Harvard have recently been exploring soapwort's foaming properties for broader food and beverage applications, because the foam it produces is finer and more stable than almost anything you can get from synthetic emulsifiers. And a Turkish research team showed that soapwort extract can successfully replace up to 75% of the egg white in sponge cake recipes, producing the same lift and structure with a plant-based ingredient. So you have a plant that washes your clothes, cleans your body, polishes jewelry, treats skin conditions, and makes desserts fluffier. And it has been doing all of this for thousands of years across multiple continents and cultures. The evidence for that timeline is real, and it stretches far deeper than most people realize. The earliest records of humans using plant saponins for cleaning date back to ancient Babylon, around 2800 BC, preserved on clay tablets. Some researchers believe the practice goes back even further. There's evidence suggesting that people living near streams during the Stone Age, possibly as far back as 12,000 years ago, were already using saponin-rich plants growing along the water's edge to wash their hands and skin. The plants were right there. The lather was obvious the moment you crushed the roots. By about 1500 BC, the Egyptians were bathing regularly with saponin-based substances, mixing plant extracts with animal and vegetable oils. In ancient Greece and Rome, soapwort was used both as a cleanser and medicinally to treat skin conditions like eczema and rashes. The species name officinalis literally means used in medicine, a label the plant earned because apothecaries stocked it as a standard remedy. Folk medicine traditions across Europe prescribed soapwort extracts for symptoms of bronchitis, rheumatism, and even syphilis. By the medieval period in Europe, monastic gardens were growing Saponaria officinalis as a standard crop. The first recorded mention in English monastic garden records dates to around 1050, and it appears again in records from 1200. Whether soapwort arrived in England with the monks or with the Normans after 1066 remains debated. Either way, it was well established before the end of the 12th century. If you're wondering how that works, picture this. A medieval monastery in England around the year 1100. The monks are washing their liturgical garments, their altar cloths, their finest embroidered textiles, in a basin of water mixed with crushed soapwort root. The lather is gentle enough that the dyes don't run, the fibers don't weaken, the fabric comes out clean and soft, and the wash water can go straight back into the garden without poisoning anything growing there. That is not a primitive cleaning method. That is an elegant one. When European settlers crossed the Atlantic, they brought soapwort with them. The plant arrived in North America around the 1820s and naturalized immediately. It's now a widespread wildflower, growing in colonies along roads, streams, and in meadows from coast to coast. Some states even classify it as a noxious weed because of how aggressively it spreads. The settlers used it exactly the way their ancestors had. They crushed the roots and leaves, boiled them in water, and used the suds to wash everything from dishes to clothing to their own skin. Americans had another name for soapwort. They called it Bouncing Bet. That was an old nickname for a washerwoman. But something was already changing in the background. A decision that seemed small at the time was about to make soapwort, and every other natural cleaning plant on the planet, nearly obsolete. For a while, things actually seemed fine. The shift happened gradually, and at first, it looked like progress. In 1837, a candle maker named William Proctor and a soap maker named James Gamble, both immigrants who had married sisters in Cincinnati, Ohio, formed a business partnership. By 1859, their company was generating $1 million in annual sales. During the American Civil War, Procter & Gamble won contracts to supply the Union Army with soap and candles. That contract did something no advertising campaign could. It put their product into the hands of hundreds of thousands of soldiers who had never used commercially manufactured soap before. After the war, those soldiers went home knowing what factory soap was. The habit stuck, and the realization that personal hygiene could save lives during wartime pushed the regular use of soap into mainstream American culture for the first time. In 1878, a factory worker at Procter & Gamble left a soap mixing machine running too long, accidentally whipping air into a batch. The result was a soap that floated in water. The company named it Ivory Soap, marketed it as 99 44/100% pure, and it became one of the first nationally branded consumer products in American history. And then came the part that sealed Soapwort's fate: advertising. By the late 1800s, print magazines and newspapers were carrying the message to millions of homes. Factory soap wasn't just available. It was marketed as modern, hygienic, and superior. By the late 1920s, three massive firms dominated the entire industry: Colgate-Palmolive Peet, Lever Brothers, and Procter & Gamble. The scale of their advertising made it nearly impossible for a plant you could grow in your garden to compete for attention, let alone shelf space. This had nothing to do with Soapwort failing. It had everything to do with capital finding a product it could bottle, brand, and sell at volume. If you're enjoying this, consider subscribing. We cover stories like this every week, the hidden histories behind the everyday things you never think to question. While the soap industry was scaling up into an empire, a much quieter shift was happening in a laboratory in Germany. And this is where the real break from plant-based cleaning happened. During World War I, Germany faced severe shortages of fats and oils, the key ingredients in traditional soap. The war effort needed those resources for other purposes. So, in 1916, German chemists developed the first synthetic detergent. It wasn't made from animal fat or plant saponins. It was made from petroleum-derived chemicals. The early versions were called Neckel, and they were only decent cleaners, but they were excellent wetting agents for the textile industry. After the war, the chemistry kept developing. By the late 1920s, long-chain alcohol sulfates and alkylyl sulfonates were showing up on the commercial market. They worked better than soap in hard water. They didn't leave the residue that caused bathtub rings. And they could be manufactured cheaply at industrial scale from petroleum byproducts. By the end of World War II, synthetic detergents had swamped soap sales for most general cleaning purposes. And by the 1950s, detergents had almost completely replaced soap as the first choice in America for doing laundry. Nobody voted on this. Nobody compared the two options side by side and chose the synthetic version. A wartime shortage of animal fat, a petroleum industry looking for new markets, and a consumer culture trained by decades of advertising to trust factory products simply converged. And in the space of about 40 years, a 4,000-year relationship between humans and plant-based cleaning agents was severed. The ingredients that replaced soapwort and soap nuts read like a chemistry exam: sodium lauryl sulfate, sodium laureth sulfate, optical brighteners, synthetic fragrances built from dozens of undisclosed chemical compounds, 1,4-dioxane, a byproduct of the manufacturing process that shows up in roughly 2/3 of commercial laundry products, and doesn't even have to be listed on the label because it's technically a contaminant, not an ingredient. Soapwort, meanwhile, produces wash water that is just water and plant matter. You can pour it directly onto your garden. Someone saw this coming. Or, more accurately, certain institutions never forgot what soapwort could do, even as the consumer market abandoned it. Museum textile conservators around the world have continued using soapwort extract to clean irreplaceable antique fabrics. The reason is painfully simple. Modern detergents destroy old textiles. The chemicals are too harsh. They break down protein fibers in wool and silk. They strip historic dyes. They leave residues that accelerate degradation over time. Soapwort does none of that. Its pH falls between 5.8 and 6.2, right in the neutral to slightly acidic range that preserves both mineral integrity in stone surfaces and protein fibers in textiles. It lifts dirt without damaging the material underneath. That's why it was trusted with the Shroud of Turin, and that's why conservators at institutions preserving 18th century silk tapestries still reach for a soapwort solution when the stakes are highest. When the world's most priceless fabrics need washing, the experts don't use what's in your laundry room. They use a plant root. Compare that to vinegar, which has a pH around 2.4 and will etch marble and limestone within 90 seconds of contact. Or baking soda, at a pH of about 8.3, which degrades wool fibers over time. Soapwort sits right in the sweet spot where it cleans without corroding anything. Meanwhile, soap nuts have been quietly building a following of their own. In India and Nepal, they never went away. Families in the Himalayan foothills still harvest them the same way they have for generations. But over the past 2 decades, soap nuts have started showing up in natural living stores and online marketplaces worldwide. Marketed as a zero-waste, chemical-free laundry alternative, the appeal is obvious. You toss a few dried shells into a cloth bag, throw it in the wash, and let the water do the extraction. No measuring, no plastic bottles, no synthetic fragrance that lingers on your clothes for days. When the shells are spent, they go into the compost bin. The entire product cycle, from tree to compost, generates zero waste and zero pollution. And the science coming out of modern laboratories is making the story even more interesting. Researchers sequenced the full genome of Saponaria officinalis and identified 14 enzymes involved in producing its key saponins, saponarioside A and saponarioside B. Those saponins don't just clean things. They have demonstrated anti-cancer properties in laboratory studies. They're being investigated as endosomal escape enhancers for targeted tumor therapies, which means they could help cancer-fighting drugs get inside the specific cells they need to reach. And the molecular structure of soapwort saponins shares common features with QS21, a compound already used as a vaccine adjuvant, meaning soapwort could eventually become a source of ingredients that make vaccines more effective. A plant that was a medieval laundry detergent is now being studied as a potential weapon against cancer, and most people have never heard its name. The practical side of this story matters just as much as the science. Because unlike most of the plants people romanticize on the internet, soapwort is genuinely easy to grow. It's not some finicky tropical specimen that needs a greenhouse and daily attention. It's a rugged, spreading perennial that thrives on neglect. Saponaria officinalis is hardy in zones 3 through 10, which covers almost the entire continental United States and most of the temperate world. It grows 1 to 3 feet tall. It tolerates sun or shade. It will grow in poor soil, rocky soil, clay, sand. It blooms from midsummer to fall, with clusters of pale pink or white flowers that smell sweet and attract butterflies and pollinators. The biggest challenge with soapwort is actually stopping it from spreading. The plant moves through underground rhizomes, white fleshy roots that can travel several feet in a single growing season. If you don't contain it, soapwort will colonize your vegetable beds, your lawn, everything nearby. The smart move is to plant it in a dedicated bed with root barriers or grow it in a large container. You want the spreading because more roots means more soap, but you want it on your terms. You can start soapwort from seed indoors in late winter and transplant the seedlings after the last frost, or sow seeds directly into the garden in spring. You can also propagate it by dividing an existing clump in early spring or fall, which is the fastest way to get a producing patch. Either way, once it's established, it comes back every year without replanting and can be cut back multiple times per season. If your patch gets overcrowded, pull up every third plant to give the others breathing room. That thinning gives you more roots for soap and keeps the colony healthy. Making soap from soapwort is almost absurdly simple. Pick about 12 leafy stems. Chop or bruise the leaves and roots. Put them in a pot with a pint of water. Bring it to a boil, then simmer on low heat for about 30 minutes. Let it cool, strain out the plant material, and you have a gentle liquid cleanser that works for dishes, laundry, and skin. The roots have the highest saponin concentration, so a root decoction will give you a stronger wash. You can also dry the roots, grind them into a fine powder, and store that powder in airtight jars for years. When you need soap, just add the powder to warm water. 2 cautions worth mentioning. The soap has a short shelf life, about a week, so make it fresh in small batches. And soapwort is mildly toxic if ingested by mammals. Don't eat it. Don't let your pets chew on it. And keep it away from ponds or streams because saponins are toxic to fish. Those same properties that made it useful as a fish poison in some historical cultures mean you need to be thoughtful about where your wash water drains. For soap nuts, the process is even simpler. Take 4 to 6 dried shells, put them in a small cotton bag, and toss the bag into your washing machine. In warm or hot water, the shells release their saponins and clean your clothes. You can reuse the same batch of shells 3 to 5 times before they're spent. After that, compost them. The Sapindus mucorosi tree can't be grown everywhere. It needs tropical or subtropical conditions and takes about 10 years to start bearing fruit. But dried soap nuts are widely available online, and a single bag lasts months. What makes this story worth telling is not that soapwort and soap nuts are better than modern detergents in every way. They're not. They don't work as well on heavily soiled items. They don't produce the massive lather people have been trained to expect. They won't brighten whites the way optical brighteners do, because optical brighteners work by depositing UV-reactive chemicals onto fabric that make clothes appear whiter under certain light, which has nothing to do with actually being clean. What makes this story worth telling is the question it forces you to sit with. For 4,000 years, humans cleaned themselves and their belongings with roots and berries that grew wild in their gardens. The system worked. It was gentle, effective, biodegradable, free, and endlessly renewable. And then a war-driven shortage of animal fat and a petroleum industry looking for new revenue streams replaced all of it in less than 50 years. Not because the replacement was better for people, not because someone ran the comparison and chose the synthetic option on its merits, but because factories needed something to sell, and a plant you can grow in your backyard doesn't generate quarterly revenue. The real question isn't whether soapwort was good enough. Museums already answered that. They trust it with things that are literally irreplaceable. The real question is what else we stopped using, not because it failed, but because nobody could put it in a bottle and charge you for it. If that question interests you, the video on screen right now covers another ingredient that was erased the same way, and the story is just as strange.